The crystal chandeliers of the Silver Creek Lodge cast a fractured, glittering light over the sea of Aspen's elite, a sea of designer wool, whispered secrets, and clinking baccarat crystal. I stood near the edge of the ballroom, a flute of vintage Dom Perignon resting loosely in my gloved hand, watching the man who had given me life prepare to publicly dismantle my soul. I am Alice, 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago, at my father's lavish retirement gala, he did something that finally severed the last invisible tether binding me to the Sterling family name. Picture the scene, if you will. 250 guests, the absolute pinnacle of Colorado's high society, bankers, tech moguls, and old money aristocrats, all gathered to celebrate Arthur Sterling, the titan of Sterling Global Logistics. The air smelled of expensive oud, roasted truffles, and the intoxicating, suffocating scent of generational wealth. My father stood on the elevated mahogany stage, the spotlight catching the silver at his temples, looking every inch the conquering hero. He held the microphone with the casual authority of a man who had never been told no in his life. He was introducing his family, his trophies, one by one. When his gaze finally swept across the room and landed on me, his lips curved into that familiar, practiced smile. It was a smile that looked warm and paternal to the untrained eye, but to me, it was a scalpel. "And this," he boomed, his voice echoing through the cavernous gilded hall, "is my daughter Alice. No degree, no real direction, just a permanent guest on the family's generosity." The laughter that erupted was instantaneous, a ripple of sycophantic amusement that washed over the room. They laughed because he laughed. They laughed because it was safe. I didn't flinch. I didn't lower my eyes. I didn't feel the sting of tears because the well of my tears for the Sterling family had dried up over a decade ago. I simply smiled, a cold, placid curving of my lips, and raised my champagne glass. "Cheers," I said, my voice cutting through the dying echoes of their laughter, clear and steady enough to be picked up by the lapel mic he had absent-mindedly clipped to my lapel earlier as a joke. "This is the last time any of you will ever see me." I set the glass on a passing waiter's tray, turned on my heel, and walked out. The silence that followed me was absolute, a heavy, suffocating vacuum that sucked the oxygen from the room. What happened next, the fallout, the unraveling of an empire built on my erased existence, is a story of how invisibility can become the deadliest weapon of all. To understand the weight of that moment, you have to understand the architecture of my erasure. You have to go back 12 years, to the day my future was murdered in a mahogany-paneled study, and further back still, to the day I learned how to become a ghost in my own home. The Sterling family of Aspen, Colorado. We were the royalty of the Rocky Mountains. Our estate sat on 40 acres of pristine, snow-draped pine forest, a sprawling modern lodge of glass, steel, and dark timber that looked out over the slopes. From the outside, we were the American dream perfected. My father, Arthur Sterling, had built Sterling Global from a modest regional freight company into a continental logistics powerhouse. My mother, Catherine, was the soft warmth that balanced his cold ambition. She died when I was 8. It was an aggressive, brutal cancer that took her in a matter of months, leaving behind a silence in the house that was louder than any scream. I barely remember the sound of her voice now, but I remember the feeling of her hands, the way she would trace the line of my jaw and tell me that my mind was a sharp, beautiful thing, a diamond that needed only the right light to blind the world. 2 years after her funeral, my father married Victoria. She arrived with a son from her previous marriage, Julian, who was 3 years my senior. Within 6 months, they hadn't just moved into the Aspen estate, they had overwritten it. Victoria's minimalist, icy aesthetic replaced my mother's warm, art-filled spaces. Julian's lacrosse trophies occupied the mantels where my mother's sculptures once sat. I didn't suffer any cinematic fairy tale abuse. There were no locked closets or withheld meals. My punishment was far more insidious. I was rendered invisible. I became furniture, a piece of the architecture that was expected to be seen but never heard, never acknowledged, never valued. Julian was the golden child, the heir apparent. His B-pluses were celebrated with steak dinners and promises of sports cars. My straight A's were met with a distracted nod and a reminder to clear my plate. Julian was the future of Sterling Global. I was merely a placeholder, a biological obligation my father tolerated until I could be married off to some useful corporate ally. My father never raised a hand to me. He never screamed. He simply looked through me, his eyes sliding off my existence as if I were a window pane he was trying to see past. But there was one person who saw me. One person who refused to let me fade into the wallpaper. My grandmother Eleanor, my father's mother. She was a formidable woman, a self-made real estate mogul who had survived the brutal business landscapes of the 70s and 80s with a steel spine and a razor-sharp wit. She saw the way my father looked at me, the way Victoria subtly undermined me, the way Julian was being groomed to be a ruthless, empty suit. Every Sunday, without fail, she would call me. We would talk for hours about history, about business, about the mechanics of the world. "They want you to be small, Alice," she would tell me, her voice crackling over the line from her estate in Greenwich. "They want you quiet because a quiet woman doesn't threaten a fragile ego. But you remind me of myself, underestimated, watched. But I see you, my brilliant girl, and one day they will all see you, and it will be too late for them to do anything about it." She left me something when she died, something no one in the Sterling family knew about. But I am getting ahead of myself. In the Sterling household, I learned the art of silence. I learned to observe, to catalog, to wait. What I didn't know then was that this enforced invisibility would become my greatest armor. The day my future was officially decided for me, I was 20 years old. I was a sophomore at the University of Washington in Seattle, double majoring in supply chain management and data science, holding a 3.9 GPA and sitting on a full-ride scholarship for a prestigious summer analytics program in London. I had plans. I had a vision. I was finally breathing air that didn't taste like my stepmother's passive-aggressive perfume. My father called me on a Tuesday. A mandatory family meeting, he said. Those 3 words had always been the prologue to a disaster. I flew back to Aspen, stepping into the cold, sterile air of the estate, and found him in his study. The room was a monument to his ego, walls lined with framed Forbes covers, industry awards, and photographs of him shaking hands with senators. Victoria stood beside his massive oak desk, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder, a united front of polished apathy. Julian was lounging in a leather chair, scrolling through his phone, not even bothering to look up. "Alice," my father began, not looking up from a leather-bound folio. "We need to make some sacrifices as a family. Julian has been accepted into the executive MBA program at Harvard. It is an incredible opportunity, a necessary step for him to take over the European divisions." My heart rate didn't change. I had spent 18 years learning to read the micro-expressions on my father's face. I already knew the script. "We cannot afford both your university tuition and his program," he continued, his voice devoid of any actual regret. "So, we have decided you will take a permanent leave of absence from school. Julian's career will benefit the whole family. Your little degree in whatever it is you're studying is a hobby. His is a dynasty." Victoria chimed in, her voice dripping with synthetic sweetness. "A girl doesn't need to exhaust herself with numbers and logistics, Alice. You'll find a nice, stable husband someday. That is what really matters. Let Julian carry the burden of the legacy." I sat there, frozen in the velvet chair. Not because I was surprised. I had spent a decade learning never to be surprised by their cruelty. But because some small, foolish, stubborn part of my heart had still harbored a microscopic hope that my mother's memory might shield me. "You promised Mom," I heard myself say, my voice barely a whisper. "Before she died, you promised you would support my education. You promised you would never let me be dependent on a man." My father's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. "Circumstances change, Alice. The market is volatile. When the company stabilizes, I will make it up to you." He never did. What I found out years later, through a drunken slip of the tongue by a former family accountant, was that the company was more than stable. They were flush with cash. They simply chose not to spend a single dime on me. I didn't argue that day. I didn't scream, I didn't throw the heavy crystal ashtray sitting on the desk, though every nerve in my body screamed at me to do so. I just nodded, stood up, and walked out of the study. But inside, in the darkest, most fortified corner of my mind, I made a vow. This was the last time I would ever let anyone else dictate my worth. I packed 2 suitcases. I emptied my meager savings account, totaling exactly $2,400. I left the Aspen estate before dawn, the tires of my rented sedan crunching on the frost-covered gravel, and I never looked back. I moved to Seattle with a suitcase of clothes that didn't fit the rainy, grim reality of my new life, and a heart made of ice. My first apartment was a 400-square-foot studio in Pioneer Square, situated directly above a commercial laundromat. The pipes rattled like dying engines all night, and the walls were so thin I could hear my neighbors breathing. I ate instant ramen and day-old bagels, surviving on black coffee and sheer, unadulterated spite. But here is the thing about rock bottom. It provides a solid foundation to build upon. You cannot fall any further. I got a job as a data entry clerk at a mid-tier, struggling freight brokerage. It was entry-level, minimum wage, soul-crushing work. But the owner, a grizzled, chain-smoking veteran of the industry named Elias Thorne, had a habit of watching his employees when he thought they weren't looking. One evening, he found me in the server room, rewriting a flawed routing algorithm that the company's senior analysts had botched, a script I had taught myself to write using open-source courses from MIT. Elias stood in the doorway for a long time, the smoke from his cigar curling toward the ceiling. "You've got a mind like a steel trap, kid," he rasped. "Use it. Don't let them put you in a box." So, I didn't. I stayed late. I learned every system, every flaw, every bottleneck in the logistics chain. I took night classes, absorbed every textbook, and built a network of contacts in the gritty, unglamorous underbelly of the shipping world. I didn't call Aspen. I didn't ask for a single dollar. When my father's assistant sent a birthday card with a $50 check tucked inside, a pathetic attempt at a guilt trip, I used it to light my stove. 4 years after I left Colorado, I had saved enough, and more importantly, I had proven enough to strike out on my own. I founded Apex Solutions. It was just me, a secondhand laptop, and a rented desk in a shared, rundown co-working space in Bellevue. We specialized in predictive supply chain analytics and warehouse automation routing. It wasn't glamorous. It was math, code, and brutal efficiency. But it was profitable. And I kept my name off everything. No LinkedIn profile, no press releases, no face on the website. All business went through a shell corporation and Elias's old legal contacts. Why the absolute secrecy? Because I knew the Sterling family. I knew that if they found out I was succeeding, they would either try to claim credit for my genius to soothe their egos, or they would try to crush me out of sheer vindictiveness. Some people build empires to prove their worth to the world. I built mine in the shadows because silence was the only language my family had ever taught me, and I had become fluent in it. Grandmother Eleanor died 2 years ago, when I was 30. I flew to Connecticut for the funeral, wearing a black veil, standing in the very back of the cathedral, watching my father deliver a eulogy about a remarkable woman who had dedicated her life to the Sterling legacy. The irony was so thick it coated my throat. At the reception, I kept to myself, slipping out before anyone could recognize the ghost they had tried to exorcise. But 3 days later, I received a call from a lawyer I had never heard of. Beatrice Vance, a senior partner at an elite Boston firm specializing in ironclad estate planning. "Miss Sterling," her voice was crisp, professional, and laced with a hidden warmth. "I represent your grandmother's separate, private estate. She established a blind trust in your name 8 years ago, with explicit, legally binding instructions that no other member of the Sterling family be informed of its existence." I nearly dropped my phone. The trust contained $1.2 million. She left a letter for you as well, Beatrice continued. Would you like me to read it? I said yes, though my voice sounded like it belonged to a stranger. My dearest Alice, Eleanor's voice seemed to echo through the receiver. I know what they did to you. I know about the tuition, the lies, the absolute theft of your potential. I argued with Arthur until I had no breath left. But he is a man deafened by his own arrogance. This money is yours. No strings, no conditions, no oversight. Use it to build the fortress they cannot breach. Remember what I always told you. Don't let anyone tell you that you are worthless. When they finally see your worth, it will be too late for them to claim it. I believe in you. I always have. I used a portion of that money to scale Apex Solutions, hiring top-tier talent, leasing server space, and moving into a real office. The rest I kept locked away as insurance for a day I hoped would never come, but always knew was inevitable. That day arrived 3 weeks ago. Let me tell you about Apex Solutions today. We have 45 employees, 30 million in annual revenue, and offices overlooking the Puget Sound in Seattle. I wear Tom Ford now, not because I need to impress anyone, but because I earned every stitch. We specialize in logistics optimization, helping massive corporations streamline their global supply chains, reduce carbon footprints, and slash operational costs. It is ruthless, brilliant, highly lucrative work. And here is the part that would make you laugh if it weren't so painfully, beautifully ironic. One of our biggest, most vital clients is Sterling Global Logistics, my father's company. They signed a 5-year exclusive service contract with us 3 years ago. We handle their predictive routing, automated warehouse management, and international carrier negotiations. The contract saves them roughly 40% in annual operational overhead. My father has absolutely no idea who owns Apex. All communications go through my executive team. All contracts are signed by my CFO, Thomas Wright. The few times Arthur Sterling has praised Apex Solutions at industry galas, he has been praising his own estranged daughter's work. The daughter he told the world was a worthless freeloader. 3 weeks ago, I received a formal, gold-embossed invitation to his retirement party at the Silver Creek Lodge. I almost threw it into the fireplace. Almost. But then I thought about Eleanor. I thought about 12 years of silence, of every promise broken, of every door slammed in my face. I RSVP'd yes. Not because I wanted reconciliation, not because I harbored some delusional hope that time had softened his heart. I went because I knew, with absolute crystalline certainty, that my father would do something unforgivable. And when he did, I wanted to be there to say goodbye on my own terms. I just didn't know exactly how right I would be. The Silver Creek Lodge hadn't changed in a decade. Same roaring fireplaces, same pretentious valet service, same crowd of old money and new ambition pretending they belonged to the same species. I wore a simple architectural black Dior gown, my grandmother's pearl earrings, and a Patek Philippe watch. Everything I owned, I had bought with my own blood, sweat, and brilliance. That mattered to me more than the labels. Victoria intercepted me at the entrance. She had aged, but her mask of polite condescension hadn't slipped a millimeter. Her dress was Chanel, her diamonds were ice, and her eyes did a rapid, calculating inventory of my outfit before she spoke. "Alice, you came," she said, her tone suggesting this was both a mild surprise and a minor inconvenience. "Your father wasn't sure you'd have anything appropriate to wear for this caliber of event." I smiled, a sharp, thin expression. How thoughtful of him to worry about my wardrobe. Inside, the elite of Colorado mingled beneath the crystal light. I recognized faces from my father's old dinner parties, people who had looked right through me at 16. None of them recognized the woman standing before them now. Julian swept past with a model thin blonde on his arm, not even glancing in my direction. He was loudly broadcasting his vision for the company's future to a group of sycophants. Classic Julian. All inherited confidence, zero actual substance. I found my seat assignment. Table 42, the far corner near the service kitchens, populated by distant cousins and minor shareholders I had never met. Not the family table, not even close. I wasn't surprised, but I noted it. A waiter offered champagne. I took a glass. Across the room, I caught my father's eye. He nodded once, a dismissal disguised as an acknowledgement, and turned back to his real guests. The evening was just beginning, and I had a front row seat to my own family's contempt. I have learned over the years that the best intelligence comes from staying quiet and keeping your ears open. From my corner table, I watched and listened. The acoustics in that lodge carried conversations perfectly. My father was holding court near the bar, surrounded by his board of directors. I heard him mention operational restructuring and strategic partnerships, but then his voice rose, filled with genuine admiration. Apex Solutions has been transformative for us, he was saying to a silver-haired man I recognized as a major shipping magnate. They are the absolute backbone of our operations now. Whoever runs that firm is a generational genius. The other man nodded eagerly. I've been trying to get a meeting with them for months. Very private operation. Do you know who's behind it? My father shrugged, taking a sip of his scotch. Never met them personally. Everything goes through their legal team and account managers. But honestly, I don't care who they are, as long as they keep delivering the margins. I took a slow sip of champagne to hide my smile. My phone buzzed in my clutch. A text from Thomas, my CFO. Sterling Global contract renewal docs arrived. They want another 5 years. Waiting on your final decision. I typed back, I will have an answer by the end of the week. What my father didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that Apex's contract with Sterling Global was coming up for renewal. If we walked away, they would lose 40% of their operational efficiency overnight. In the logistics industry, that isn't just an inconvenience. That is a death sentence. I hadn't decided what to do yet. Part of me wanted to keep the professional relationship entirely separate from the personal toxicity. But as I watched my father bask in the praise for his company's success, a success built entirely on the foundation of my work, I felt something shift inside me. Tonight would determine everything. I needed to move, to shake off the strange, cold energy building in my chest. At the bar, I ran into the extended family firing squad. Aunt Caroline, Victoria's younger sister, spotted me first. Her face cycled through surprise, pity, and condescension in half a second. "Alice, oh my goodness, I almost didn't recognize you," she trilled, looking me up and down. "You look, well, still up in Seattle doing whatever it is you do? Consulting?" "Supply chain analytics," I said smoothly. "Oh, how nice," she replied, in the exact tone one uses to acknowledge a hobby like collecting sea glass. "Are you seeing anyone? Your father mentioned you're still single. 32, right? Time flies." Before I could respond, Uncle Richard joined in. "Arthur was just telling me you're still figuring things out. Nothing wrong with being a late bloomer. I suppose not everyone is meant for traditional success." I realized with cold clarity what had happened. My father had briefed them. He had given them the talking points, set the narrative of the family disappointment before I had even stepped off the plane. "Arthur said you had some emotional difficulties after leaving school," Aunt Caroline continued, lowering her voice to a theatrical whisper. "Mental health struggles. So brave of you to come tonight despite everything." I felt my grip tighten on my champagne flute, not from hurt, I was long past that, from the sheer, unadulterated audacity. "I appreciate the concern," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, "but I'm doing very well, better than I have ever been." They exchanged glances, the kind of look that says, "Poor thing doesn't even know how far she's fallen." I excused myself before I said something that would break the fragile veneer of the evening. But a plan was forming in my mind, cold, clear, inevitable. Julian found me on the terrace, looking out over the snow-covered golf course. The mountain air was biting, the stars sharp and distant. "Well, well," his voice came from behind me, heavy with inherited arrogance. "The prodigal daughter." I didn't turn around. Julian. He stepped beside me, close enough that I could smell his ridiculously expensive cologne. Dad's about to give his speech. Wanted to make sure you weren't planning any dramatic scenes. Why would I do that? I asked, staring out at the pines. Because you've always been jealous, he said, stating it as an undeniable fact. The way you stormed off after the tuition decision, the way you disappeared to Seattle like a wounded animal, you've never gotten over it. Now I turned, looking at my stepbrother in his $5,000 bespoke suit, his Rolex catching the moonlight. Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night? His eyes hardened. I heard you started some kind of boutique firm up there, playing businesswoman. He laughed, a short, cruel sound. How long until it fails? 6 months? A year? Then you'll come crawling back, begging Dad for a desk in the mailroom. I won't. You will. You always do. You're weak, Alice. You always have been. I could have told him then. I could have told him about Apex, about the contract, about how his precious empire was being held together by the sister he dismissed as a freeloader. But I didn't, because some revelations require the right stage. You know what, Julian? You can believe whatever makes you feel better about your own mediocrity. I started to walk past him, but I paused. I promise you this. After tonight, you're going to wish you had treated me with a little more respect. His laugh followed me inside, dismissive and echoing. He had no idea what was coming. None of them did. The ballroom lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. My father climbed the steps to thunderous, sycophantic applause. The conquering hero of Colorado logistics, taking his final bow. Thank you, he said, his voice carrying that practiced, booming warmth he had perfected over decades. 40 years in this business. It's been one hell of a ride. Laughter, more applause. He began his speech, thanking partners, employees, mentors, taking credit for the very algorithms my team had written. Then came the family segment. I couldn't have done any of this without my incredible wife, Victoria. He gestured to her table. 30 years of putting up with my late nights. You're a saint. More applause. Victoria dabbed at her dry eyes, perfectly on cue. And my son, Julian, who will be taking over as CEO come January, the future of Sterling Global. I couldn't be prouder. A standing ovation. Julian rose, waving, the picture of corporate royalty. Then, my father's eyes found me in the shadows of table 42. Something mean and petty shifted in his expression. He wanted a punchline. He wanted to reassert his dominance. And of course, my daughter Alice. The spotlight swung blindly for a moment before finding me. I felt 250 pairs of eyes turned toward me. No degree, no real career, just a permanent freeloader off the family's generosity. He paused for comedic effect, waiting for the chuckles. But hey, at least she showed up tonight. Maybe someday she'll find a rich husband to take care of her. The room erupted in laughter. Real, booming laughter. The kind that comes from people who think they are in on a joke, entirely unaware that they are watching cruelty dressed up as comedy. I sat perfectly still. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't look away. I just waited for the laughter to peak and then to fade. And then I stood up. The room went quiet as I rose. I could feel every eye on me, some curious, some pitying, some already preparing to witness a breakdown. The unstable daughter finally cracking under her father's harmless joke. I picked up my champagne glass slowly, deliberately. My father's smile faltered just a fraction. He hadn't expected me to react. I never did. I was supposed to sit there and take it, to absorb the humiliation like I always had. I raised the glass toward him. Congratulations on your retirement, Dad, I said. My voice was clear, steady, carrying effortlessly through the silent room. 40 years in business, quite an achievement. I paused, letting the silence stretch. You taught me a lot about hard work, about sacrifice, about exactly what kind of loyalty family can expect from you. The silence was absolute now. I could hear the crackle of the fireplace 3 tables away. So, here's to you. I lifted my champagne higher. Cheers! This is the last time any of you will ever see me. I set the glass down without drinking. Then, I picked up my clutch, turned, and walked toward the exit. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor, a sharp, rhythmic metronome in that cavernous room. I didn't run. I didn't hurry. I just walked, spine straight, head high. Behind me, silence. Complete, total, devastating silence. Someone gasped. Someone whispered. But mostly, there was just the echo of my footsteps and 250 people trying to process the fact that the daughter they expected to be broken had just walked out on her own terms. I pushed through the heavy oak doors and stepped into the freezing mountain night, and for the first time in 12 years, I could breathe. I was almost to my car, a sleek black Porsche Taycan with custom plates, when I heard the crunch of snow behind me. Alice! Alice, stop right there! Victoria's voice, shrill and furious, cut through the cold air. I kept walking. What do you think you're doing? She grabbed my arm, spinning me around. Her face was red beneath the lodge's exterior sconces. Her careful composure had shattered. Do you have any idea what you just did? You humiliated your father in front of the entire state. I looked at her hand on my arm until she removed it. I humiliated him? I asked quietly. I think you have your directions backwards. My father appeared behind her, his face a mask of thunderous rage. He was aware of the guests watching from the windows. I could see him calculating his optics. Get back inside, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Apologize. Now. No. The word hung in the freezing air between us. This isn't a negotiation, Alice. I'm your father. I'm telling you to go back in there. You're telling me what? I cut him off, a transgression I had never committed in my life. That I should go back in there and let you keep using me as your punchline? That I should smile while you tell the entire state I'm worthless? It was a joke, he snarled. It was the truth of how you see me, I replied, my voice like ice, and I'm done pretending otherwise. I opened my car door. My father stepped forward, his ego bruised, his authority challenged. If you leave now, you're done. Do you understand me? No more family, no more safety net, nothing. I almost laughed. Dad, you cut me off at 20 years old. You just didn't have the courage to say it out loud. Tonight, I'm saying it for both of us. I slid into the driver's seat. Goodbye. I started the engine, the electric motor humming silently, and drove away into the snow. I pulled into a rest stop 20 minutes down the mountain pass and sat in the car, the heater blasting, my hands still gripping the wheel. For a long moment, I just breathed. I know that some of you hearing this understand that specific, suffocating feeling. The feeling of being the family disappointment, the one they talk about in whispers, the one whose success they actively refuse to see. If you've ever sat at a family gathering while someone made you the punchline, if you've ever smiled through pain because making a scene would only prove them right, this story is for you. The morning after the party, I woke up in my penthouse in Seattle feeling lighter than I had in years. But I knew it wasn't over. Families like the Sterlings don't let go of control that easily. They would try to control the narrative, spin the story, make me the villain. What they didn't know was that I held the pen, and I was about to rewrite their entire reality. The week that followed started with a coordinated smear campaign. Not from my father directly, he was too proud for that, but from cousins, aunts, and family friends. Alice, I heard about the party. Your dad says you're struggling. Victoria told me you had some kind of episode. We're all worried. The narrative was being written in real time. Poor Alice, unstable, jealous, had a breakdown. Arthur Sterling, the patient, loving father, doing his best with a troubled daughter. I didn't respond to a single message. Then came the more interesting call. My phone rang on Tuesday afternoon, a Colorado number. Miss Sterling, this is James Crawford. I'm a senior partner at Sterling Global. The voice was polished, professional, but laced with an undercurrent of panic. I'm calling on behalf of Arthur. He'd like to discuss mending fences. Between you and me, there's been some concerning chatter about your connection to certain business partners. Rumors. Probably nothing. But Arthur thought it would be good to clear the air. I went cold. They were fishing. What kind of rumors? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. Oh, something about our consulting partners at Apex Solutions. Someone thought they saw you at their Seattle offices once. I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. My mind raced. How? Who had seen me? I'm not sure what you're referring to, I lied smoothly, but please tell my father I have nothing to discuss with him. I hung up. They were getting close. It was time to stop waiting and start acting. While I was fielding concerned texts in Seattle, my father was facing a different kind of crisis in Aspen. I learned later what happened in that boardroom. Arthur had walked into what should have been a routine quarterly meeting. Instead, his CFO looked like he had seen a ghost. We have a massive problem with Apex Solutions, the CFO said, sliding a folder across the mahogany table. Their contract is up for renewal in 60 days. They haven't responded to our extension offer. They've gone completely dark. Arthur frowned. Send another offer. Double the retainer if you have to. We've tried 3 times. Their legal team just says under review. Then we tried calling their executives directly. We can't. Sir, Apex is a black box. No one meets with their leadership. Everything goes through intermediaries. Arthur's frown deepened. We've been working with them for 3 years. Someone must have met with them. No, sir, it's all been virtual. Legal representatives. No one at this company has ever met the actual ownership. A long, terrifying silence filled the room. If they walk away from us, the CFO continued, his voice trembling, we lose 40% of our operational efficiency overnight. It would take at least 2 years to rebuild that infrastructure. In this market, it's a death spiral. Arthur stared at the folder, the timing, the silence, the fact that this was happening right after his daughter's public exit. Find out who owns that company, he ordered, his voice deadly quiet. I don't care what it takes. I want a name by the end of the week. What Arthur didn't know was that the name he was looking for was already sitting in a boardroom overlooking the Puget Sound. Thursday evening, my phone rang. Victoria. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Alice, sweetheart. Her voice was honey and sugar, the performance of a lifetime. I've been so worried about you. Listen, about the party, your father feels terrible. He didn't mean what he said. He was nervous, trying to be funny. Why don't you come home this weekend? We could have dinner, just the 4 of us. Clear the air. I could picture her sitting in that pristine living room, rehearsing this call, planning exactly which buttons to push. Does Dad want to apologize? I asked. A slight hesitation. He wants to move forward. That's what matters, isn't it? So, no apology. Alice, don't be difficult. We're trying to help you. Help me? Now? I laughed, a genuine cold sound. Victoria, you've spent 20 years making sure I knew I wasn't really part of this family. Now you're calling to help me. Why? Another pause, longer this time. I think we both know there's more going on here than just family drama, she said, her voice dropping its warmth, revealing the steel underneath. Whatever you're planning, and I know you're planning something, it would be better for everyone if you just came home and talked this through. No. I hung up. They knew something. They just didn't know how much to fear yet. The next morning, I drove to Beatrice Vance's office in downtown Seattle. Beatrice had been my grandmother's lawyer, and since the trust fund had become mine, her office had become my sanctuary. I've been expecting you, she said when I walked in. I assume this is about Sterling Global? They're investigating Apex, trying to find out who owns it. Beatrice nodded, unsurprised. Your anonymity was always going to be temporary. The question is, how do you want this to unfold? She spread documents across her desk, the Apex contract, every clause, every exit provision. Your contract includes a standard 30-day termination notice, Beatrice said, pointing to the relevant section. You can end the agreement for any reason. Strategic repositioning. No penalties, no legal exposure. And your grandmother's trust is completely separate from the Sterling estate. Legally unimpeachable. Arthur has no claim to any of it. I stared at the papers. Everything was in order. What did my grandmother say about all this when she set up the trust? Beatrice smiled sadly. She said, "One day Alice is going to need leverage, and when that day comes, I want her to have it." She also said something else. Tell her not to be cruel about it. Just be honest. Sometimes the truth is the only punishment that matters. I nodded. The truth it was. That afternoon, I sat down with Thomas Wright in Apex's glass-walled conference room. Thomas had been with me since year 2. He knew everything about my family, about Sterling Global, about why I'd kept my name off the paperwork. They want to renew the contract, he said, scrolling through his tablet. 5 more years. They're terrified. I pulled up the financial projections. If we walk away, Sterling Global loses 40% of their efficiency within 60 days. Their margins will collapse. Julian's reputation as CEO will be finished before it even begins. What do you want to do? Thomas asked. I had been thinking about this for days, about Eleanor's words, about revenge versus boundaries. Draft the termination letter, I said finally. 30-day notice, no malice, no accusations, just business. And the reason? Strategic repositioning. That's all they need to know officially. I paused. But I'm also going to write a personal letter to my father, separate envelope. He deserves to know exactly who he's been depending on and exactly why that's ending. I spent all of Sunday writing that letter. The first draft was too angry. The second was too cold. The final version was simple, clean, factual. Dear Dad, you said I had no future. You told 250 people I was worthless. I want you to know something. The company you called the backbone of Sterling Global, Apex Solutions, is mine. I built it. I own it. For 3 years, the daughter you dismissed has been the cornerstone of your business. I'm ending our contract not as revenge, but as a boundary. Grandmother Eleanor left me a trust fund you never knew about. She saw what you couldn't, that I was worth investing in. Everything I have, I built myself with her faith and without your support. I don't need you to apologize. I don't need you to understand. I just need you to know that I am not what you said I was. I never was. Don't contact me again. Alice Catherine Sterling. I included my mother's middle name deliberately, the name I had reclaimed. I also included a photocopy of the Apex Incorporation papers, my name as sole owner clearly visible. Monday, 9 a.m. Courier confirmation. The package had arrived at Sterling Global headquarters. I sat in my office watching my phone. 10:15 a.m. Missed call from Arthur. 10:17 a.m. Missed call from Arthur. 10:23 a.m. Missed call from Julian. 10:31 a.m. Missed call from Victoria. 11:02 a.m. Text from Arthur. Call me now. By noon, I had 15 missed calls and a dozen frantic texts. I didn't respond to a single one. I had waited 12 years for this moment. They could wait a few more hours. At 2 p.m., my assistant knocked on my door. Miss Sterling, there's a family here who says they need to see you immediately. They're in the lobby. They had flown to Seattle. 5 hours in the air and a limo ride through the rain, just to confront me in person. I took a deep breath, checked my reflection, and straightened my blazer. Send them to conference room B, I said. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Conference room B had glass walls. I had chosen it deliberately. My employees could see inside, though they couldn't hear. Witnesses. Not to humiliate, but to ensure the meeting stayed civil. Arthur, Victoria, and Julian stood clustered near the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. They had never expected to see the world from this perspective, from my domain, my territory. Arthur turned when I entered. His face was gray, older than I had ever seen it. Alice, his voice cracked. What is this?
Hello, Dad, Victoria, Julian.
I took a seat at the head of the table, calm, professional. I assume you received my letter. Your letter? Julian stepped forward, jabbing his finger toward me. You can't just do this. This isn't a game. Sit down, Julian, I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. I won't discuss anything with you while you're yelling. He looked at my father, uncertain. Arthur nodded sharply. They sat. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Arthur leaned forward. This is all some kind of misunderstanding. Apex Solutions. You can't possibly... A company like that. You didn't build that. I did. I slid a folder across the table. Company registration, tax filings, client lists. 3 years ago, your company signed a contract with mine. You praised my work at industry events. You called us transformative. You just didn't know you were praising me. Victoria's face had gone pale. But you don't have a degree. You were just a disappointment. A what, Victoria? A failure? I was a 20-year-old who was told to sacrifice her future for a stepbrother who couldn't balance a spreadsheet. I built something anyway. Silence. Arthur stared at the documents like they might burst into flames. Okay? Arthur's voice was strained, the mask of corporate composure cracking. I apologize. I apologize about the party. Is that what you want to hear? I'm sorry. Now can we talk about the contract? You're sorry because you need something from me? I said, my voice devoid of pity. That's not an apology. That's a transaction. For God's sake, Alice, Julian slammed his palm on the table. Do you know what happens if you pull this contract? 20% of our workforce gone because of your petty revenge. It's not revenge. It's a business decision. You've been planning this for years, waiting to destroy us. Julian was standing now, veins bulging in his neck. This is sick. I planned nothing. I kept my voice level. I built a company. Your company chose to become dependent on mine. That's not my fault. You could have told us, Victoria interjected, her voice high and strained. You could have said something. When? When you told me I didn't need an education because I'd find a husband? When you spread rumors that I had mental health issues? She had no answer. I turned to my father. You want to know the worst part, Dad? I would have kept the contract going. I wasn't planning any of this. But then you stood in front of 250 people and told them I was worthless. You chose this, not me. Arthur's jaw worked. For a moment, I thought I saw something like recognition in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold steel I had known my whole life. What do you want? He asked flatly. Nothing you can give me. There must be something. You're not listening. I don't want anything from you. I never did. I just want you to know the truth. Fine. Arthur's voice went dead. If that's how you want to play this, you walk away from this family. You're done. No inheritance, nothing. I almost laughed. Dad, you cut me off at 20. What inheritance? I could make things very difficult for you. I have connections, lawyers. On what grounds? I leaned forward. Every document is legal. Every contract was signed in good faith. There's nothing here you can sue me for, and we both know it. My lawyer, who was also grandmother Eleanor's lawyer, has already reviewed every possible angle. You remember Beatrice Vance? Eleanor used her specifically because she knew you'd try something like this someday. Victoria gasped. Eleanor knew about all of this? She left me a trust fund, $1.2 million, specifically structured so you couldn't touch it. I pulled out a photocopy of the trust document. She knew exactly what kind of family she raised. That's why she protected me from it. Arthur's face went from red to white. She had no right. She had every right. It was her money. I stood. This meeting is over. I've said everything I came to say. I walked toward the door, then paused. One more thing. If you contact me again, calls, texts, showing up at my office. I will release every email, every document, every record of how this family has treated me. All of it is legal. All of it is backed up. And all of it would make a very interesting story for the business press. I opened the door. The receptionist will show you out. I stood in the doorway watching them gather themselves. 3 people who had spent my entire life making me feel small, now looking very small themselves. Arthur rose slowly, like an old man suddenly aware of his age. Victoria clutched her handbag like a shield. Julian stared at me with something new in his eyes. Not contempt anymore. Fear. "This isn't over," Julian muttered. "Yes, it is," I said. "I meant it. Every word. I spent 12 years building a life you tried to convince me I couldn't have. I did it without your help, without your approval, without your permission. And I'll continue to do it without any of you in my life." Victoria's lower lip trembled. "Alice, please, we're family. We share blood." "Linda, that's all we share." I held the door open wider. "I'm not asking for an apology. I'm not asking for reconciliation. I'm setting a boundary. Don't contact me again. Just let me go." Arthur stopped in front of me. For a moment, we just looked at each other, father and daughter, strangers who happened to share a last name. "You really hate us that much?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, Dad, I don't hate you. That's what you don't understand." I met his eyes steadily. "I just don't need you anymore, and that's something you'll have to learn to live with." He had no response to that. They walked out through the lobby, past my employees who carefully pretended not to watch. The glass doors closed behind them. I went back to my desk, opened my laptop, and got back to work. The fallout from that meeting rippled out further than I ever expected. When I sent that termination letter, I thought I was just setting a boundary. I didn't anticipate the total collapse of the Sterling Empire. 2 months after I terminated the Apex contract, the consequences became public. Sterling Global announced a massive workforce reduction. 70 employees laid off right before the holidays. The press release blamed market conditions, but everyone in the industry knew the real story. Their backbone had been removed, and they couldn't recover. Julian, barely 3 months into his role as CEO, was ousted by the board. His vision was crumbling under the weight of his father's burned bridges. Arthur came out of retirement to manage the crisis, but the damage to their reputation was terminal. Word spread. Not from me. I kept my mouth shut. But 250 people had watched my father humiliate his daughter at that party. And when those same people heard that the daughter was actually his company's most important business partner, the whispers started. In the Colorado business community, reputation is everything, and Arthur's was in ruins. A former colleague told me that at a recent industry dinner, Arthur sat alone. No one wanted to be associated with the man who had publicly disowned the daughter who had secretly been keeping his company afloat. I didn't feel triumphant hearing this. I didn't feel satisfied. I just felt tired. Grandmother Eleanor had been right. Sometimes the truth is punishment enough. I didn't have to do anything else. The truth did it all by itself. But there was one final piece of the puzzle. One final betrayal that changed everything I thought I knew about my family. A week after the confrontation in my office, I received a phone call from my uncle Silas, my father's younger brother. Silas had always been the black sheep of the Sterling family, an artist who lived in Taos. I hadn't spoken to him in over a decade. "Alice." His voice was rough, older. "I heard what happened at the party, at Arthur's office. Word travels fast. Listen, there's something you should know, something I should have told you years ago, but I was too much of a coward." I sat down slowly. "I'm listening." "When your father said the family couldn't afford both your tuition and Julian's, that was a lie. I know you figured that out, but no, you don't understand. It wasn't just that there was money available. There was a specific fund. Your mother set it up before she died for your education, enough to cover a full 4 years at any school in the country, plus living expenses. My heart stopped. Arthur drained it, Silas continued, his voice cracking. He used it for Julian's MBA, then told you there was no money. Your mother wanted you to have choices, Alice. Arthur stole them. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of my desk. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid of Arthur. We all were. But Eleanor, she found out. That's why she set up the trust for you. She couldn't get your mother's money back, but she could make sure Arthur didn't take anything else. I thought about Eleanor's letter. I know what they did to you. She knew all along. She had protected me, even from the grave. The theft of my mother's final gift to me was a bitter pill, but it didn't break me. It only solidified the walls I had built. I hung up the phone, walked over to the window, and looked out at the rain washing over the Seattle skyline. I did it, Grandma. I didn't let them define me. So, here's what I learned. If you want the moral of this story, your worth is not determined by a degree. It's not determined by your family's opinion. It's not determined by who believes in you or who tries to tear you down. Your worth is determined by what you build when no one is watching, by who you become when everyone counts you out, by the life you create with your own two hands. My father thought he was teaching me a lesson at that retirement party. He thought he was putting me in my place. What he actually did was set me free. I don't hate my family. That's the part people struggle to understand. Hate takes energy. Hate is a chain. I'd rather spend that energy on people who deserve it, on work I believe in, on a life that's truly mine. Boundaries aren't about revenge, they're about protection. They're about saying, this is where my life begins and your damage ends. If you're in a family that makes you feel small, if you have people in your life who see your potential as a threat instead of a gift, if you've ever been the family disappointment, the scapegoat, the invisible one, I see you. I've been you. And I promise you, there is life on the other side of walking away. You are not what they said you were. You never were. You are so much more. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying them. It's simply outgrowing them and leaving them to realize too late exactly what they lost.